My name is Paul Michelle and welcome back to the second part of the Northcote Hill Westside virtual tour. We begin at Westbourne Grove, looking west towards Merry Creek. Former turret house, dating from 1854 to mid-1930s. This was the south side of Westbourne Grove, shown here with the tower, arguably one of the grandest of Northcote's lost early pioneer buildings, though not the biggest. Complete with expansive grounds overlooking the Merry Creek vista, was described as a miniature mansion, complete with expensive grounds overlooking the Merry Creek vista, was described as a miniature mansion comprising 9 acres, complete with beautiful pleasure grounds, lakes, grottos, bridges, conservatory, grapery, fruit and kitchen gardens. Westbourne Grove, like James Street, has many old buildings which originally had fine views. It was always a through street to St George's Road. Little Sisters of the Poor was a convent established in 1885 on the north side of Westbourne Grove to St George's Road, once double the size. The still existing substantial buildings date from 1890 on. It was established to look after the elderly and the sick. Part of the original site was Kinsella's Farm, where the first tobacco in Victoria was grown. 89 Westbourne Grove, 1880s corner of Hartington Street, St Joseph's Villa. House built for the priest connected with the convent. Interesting, solid constructed villa. We now head back up Westbourne Grove towards High Street. 91 Westbourne Grove beside the railway cutting. Home of Dr. Thomas George Beckett, a prominent surgeon operating out of this house and High Street. Had 2 interests. Built and used Australia's first X-ray machine. Secondly, and luckily for us, was an avid photographer, documenting both domestic life and his surroundings. By the end of his life, sadly, he'd lost both his hands to radiation poisoning. The earlier black and white photos we've seen were taken by Beckett. 92 Westbourne Grove. Interesting house with unusual style, bay windows on the western side to take in the view. 93 Westbourne Grove, dating from 1887. From 1900, it was leased as a manse for the James Street Church we've seen, and eventually bought by the church. 95 Westbourne Grove, 1889, corner of Herbert Street, a 2-storey brick house, another example of the Queen Anne style. Catherine Oliver built this house, ran an extremely successful meat business. Along with Smith and Basting Street, they were the principal butchers of the district. She lived in this house into the 1920s until the late age of 94. She was a headstrong woman and she fought hard against the regulation of her business interests. Oliver also had substantial land holdings in the area, including Oliver's Paddock. 99 Westbourne Grove, early 1920s, a brick bungalow with bay windows. Chimneys and style reflect the Art Deco period. Catherine Oliver also owned this land between Herbert and Henry Street. In the 1920s it was subdivided and sold. Albert Henry Siebel founded Pura Milk Company in Preston. The Siebel family were the first owners and Albert Henry was still listed here in 1935. This family, like William Rucker, reflect the Wendish German settlers in Northcote. Schwabisch was another Wendish family whose name is on the town hall's foundation stone. William Westgarth was a great champion for encouraging Germans to settle in Melbourne in the 1850s. 108 and 1110 Westbourne Grove, late 1800s. A pair of small 2-storey Victorian terraces with small balconies, speculative development. Next door, at 112 on the left, is the larger 2-storey Victorian terrace dating from 1888 with a wraparound balcony on 2 levels. William Cox lived here, supplier of office equipment. Town Hall Blackwood Honour Board was supplied by W.F. Cox. 103 Westbourne Grove, early 1890s, corner of Henry Street, on a very large site. A single-storey substantial Victorian terrace with later terracotta tiles. Adrian John Clark, tinsmith, purchased the land with large frontage and built Baringo. The Clarks typically represented the new hard-earned wealth on Northcote Hill. 105 Westbourne Grove, corner of Henry Street. A good example, again, of the Queen Anne style. The Fearden family, having made their money in the tannery business, would have a long tenure here. 107 Westbourne Grove, 1920s. A William A. Love lived here. Connection to E.J. Love Real Estate in Reservoir. Has a distinctive period brick fence. 118 Westbourne Grove, southeast corner of Mackintosh Street, 1880s. With an imposing view and set high, a brick double-fronted terrace with large chimneys. Residence in 1935 of Niall and Frank Brennan. Niall was a Catholic journalist and intellectual. He had connections with Archbishop Daniel Mannix, a prolific author who wrote biographies on Mannix and John Wren. He stated that John Wren was a member of our family in a fairly loose way. Niall's father, Frank Brennan, shown here, was a Labour politician and Attorney General from 1929 to 1932. In 1931, Brennan was defeated for the seat of Batman by another Northcote resident, Samuel Dennis, of the United Australian Party. 3 years later, Frank Brennan won the seat back, holding it for another 15 years. The tennis courts opposite. It's an imagination time. You have to imagine an imposing dwelling, Johnston, demolished in the 1970s, shown on this 1864 map. Land at the back was owned by the Kirk family in the 1850s. Kirk's Horse and Carriage Bazaar in Melbourne was the go-to place for horses and buggies. Horses to be sold were often spelt in the lower part, which would later become the site of the Helen Street State School. We now head down Helen Street. On the left is the tennis club rooms from the 1930s. Tennis courts have been under management for St Joseph's for some time. This 1930s brick wall of the club has the insignia of St Joseph's. 26 Helen Street. This Wesleyan manse was built for the church in High Street. 2-storey Italianate brick, originally would have had rear access for the clergy. There are a number of late 19th century and early 20th century houses in Helen Street that are well worth looking at. And as we head back to Westbourne Grove, note the large palm tree at number 15. 140 Westbourne Grove, St Joseph's Parsonage, 1898, directly opposite Helen Street. Predates the next-door church by almost 30 years. A 2-storey grand Italian building designed by T.A. Payne of Brunswick. His other works include St Ambrose's in Brunswick, the Marist Brothers' residence and St Mary's in Bendigo. Cost some £1,400 to build, a lot of money at the time. This and the church reflect Catholic dominance along Westbourne Grove. St Joseph's Church, dating from 1917. First church was located in Atherton Road on the north side. There was a small number of buildings there between the railway and High Street. The architect was G.H. Vahims for this church, a favoured Catholic architect, designed St Mary's in Thornbury and the Vaucluse Convent in Richmond. With W.P. Connolly, designed the additional tall spires for St Patrick's Cathedral. From 1939, Father Daniel Coakley's parsonage lasted here for 25 years. Was a cousin of Archbishop Daniel Mannix. Coakley was a fearless man. One day he rejected an aid to an old lady from St George's Road, thinking her a fraud. She contacted Mannix, who duly sent Coakley a letter. "If this woman is half as good as she says, give her the enclosed." There was a £5 banknote. Old Coakley scribbled on the letter, "She isn't," and sent it back to Mannix. Opposite is the old Racabite Hall. Prior to the introduction of universal healthcare, one had to be quite well off to afford private medical treatment. Community organisations such as the Independent Order of Racabites provided medical assistance for members. Medications were available through special pharmacies, United Friendly dispensaries. With the Racabites, there was a condition. You had to be a non-drinker. What is interesting is the proximity to the nearby Peacock Hotel. The Star of Northcote Racabite tent was established earlier in 1876 and in the 1930s, with 660 members, was considered the largest tent in the Commonwealth. Whilst the hall dates from 1901, it was renovated extensively in 1927, likely to be designed by Harry Norris, the noted Art Deco architect. Many noted families were members of the Racabites, including Dennis, Johnson, Thompson, Membry and Schwabish. 144 Westbourne Grove, the former courthouse, Namalata, dating from 1929. Sympathetic style to the other building structures around the town hall. The last court sitting here was in the early 1990s, now part of the Aboriginal Communities Outreach Program. This drawing done in the 1970s shows the original building. Opposite is the narrow Eastman Street, linking Westbourne Grove to Hawthorne Road. Warehouses on both sides housed well-known businesses, including Johnson's Baking Company and Melbourne Vinegar Company. 203 to 207 High Street, corner of Westbourne Grove. This picture from 1910 shows High Street looking north. There is no Northcote Theatre, and the 1897 Peacock Hotel is shown. Note the centre channel in the road for the cable tram. Originally, a mechanics institute was situated at this corner. The Bastings brothers owned the land and developed it by building a set of 3 two-storey shop-dwelling terraces in 1888. Tenants included the Wedgwood Ironmongery, a hardware store, seen in the photograph. By 1920, Stott and Bastings real estate agents were there. F.W. Stott was in his day a major influence of Northcote, president of the local football and cricket clubs and innumerable committees. The last of the 3 terraces, number 207, collapsed in 1963 when Bastings General Store was demolished. Entertainment Precinct, diagonally opposite. The Northcote Picture Theatre dates from 1912 and is arguably the oldest surviving sound film cinema in Victoria, though it hasn't shown films for decades. Designed and built by Twentyman Jr. The Peacock Hotel dates from 1854. The Bastings brothers built it. Then the Plant family ran it well into the 1930s. The present building dates from 1890, with alterations in 1932 removing the Victorian facade. Northcote's major edifice on the hill was the Town Hall. Predates the nearby 3 churches we've looked at by 2 decades. Whilst built over some 30 years, it's homogeneous, as is the sympathetic later council buildings, library and the courthouse. Designed by George R. Johnson, famously known as the Town Hall architect, he designed Ballarat, Collingwood and Fitzroy Town Halls. Other designs include Her Majesty's Theatre and the Melbourne Meat Market. Built by Knott and Verso, local builders. Councillor Verso, at the time, stated the council was not bound to accept a cheap and nasty design. Johnson planned an imposing clock tower that was bitterly opposed by the residents. First stage in 1889 included the front section on High Street. It included a courthouse and post office. There was also a room for a library, but the surveyor occupied it for 3 years. The council chamber was built in 1891, and in 1913 the large hall was opened. The town hall underwent a major renovation around 1930 for the Jubilee of 1933. Harry Norris redesigned the lobby with Victor Bradley, city engineer. Designed the lavish Art Deco interior. Highly detailed plaster with faux decorated wood is mixed with real wooden panels in the main hall. Egyptian motifs highlighted. Built by Depression unemployed local craftsmen and overseen by V.J. Bradley. After the World War I and the loss of many Northcote men, the Honour entrance portal opened in 1918. A highlight is the black wood pillars, garlands and the roll of honour carving. For the original opening, furnishings were copied from Johnson's Fitzroy's opulent town hall. Some are on display as well as others, including the kidney table, council table and decorated mayoral chair, all used for the inaugural October 1890 council meeting. V.J. Bradley's engineering department at the council depot was quite famous. During World War II, they were part of a war effort building machines. Later, he requisitioned post-war surplus vehicles and equipment for both Brunswick and Northcote councils, converting them into council maintenance vehicles. In the 1950s, after he left Northcote, V.J. Bradley took over the reins of the Housing Commission of Victoria. For more historical walks, see these links. Thank you for watching.